here from mygroundforce, host of the webinar series, Prosper During the FedEx Ground Transformation, Learn How to Think Like a Fortune 500 Executive. Today I have Alex Froome back with me. We're going to take your questions from the first three sessions. Just as a review, the first session of the 12 sessions that we have was a State of the Network report where I talked about where FedEx has been and where they are now and where they're going. And Alex gave us a very detailed presentation on the current TSP agreement and the things that you need to watch out for. That was an excellent presentation. I'm sure everyone learned a lot about the contract. There were several folks that have never read the contract all the way through. So that was a lot of really good information to know. And then last week, we had a very detailed review with Matt Woodruff. Matt is the analyst that covers FedEx Ground for Credit Site, one of the top investment advisory firms in the country. And he did an outstanding job of telling us where FedEx Ground is, and where they're going and why. And, we have tried to take that information and maybe apply it to how it might affect you. So today, then, because we filled up the hours, and in Alex's case, hour and a half on the contract, we didn't get a chance to take a lot of questions during the session themselves. So today we're going to take your questions. We have some questions that are kind of divided up between sessions 1 and 3, which are very similar, and then session 2 on the contract. And we're gonna take those, and each of us will provide some comment on those questions. You can also submit your questions on the Q&A section here on your webinar toolbar at the bottom, and we look forward to getting those questions as we go along. Alex, anything to say before we jump off here? Look, we really appreciate you giving us your time today.
No, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I don't think you'd notice, but I'm wearing a purple shirt right here, to try to lend my, support to mygroundforce. So I know that
I appreciate that, but I can't get past those West Point things hanging on the back wall, so I didn't even notice your shirt. I got to be honest. So at any rate, Alex is really, really smart. I hate to say that about a West Point guy, but he really is, and he's an outstanding contractor, and he brings a lot of value. So the first question really is related to volume. And, we've talked about this transformation and why it's happening and what's going on. And then the fact that it's happening is something that they should have done years ago. They've kind of been forced into it in order to be able to compete in this new market. You heard Matt talk last week about the pressure that Amazon is bringing into this space. Remember, they're not exactly in the same business, but they're in a similar business, and they're much more efficient. Though they don't make money in that business, it's a different kind of business, but the fact that they can put pressure on FedEx and UPS is certainly affecting this market. And in order to compete going forward, FedEx has to listen to what its investors have been telling them and essentially streamline their company. And they're using the word transformation. So let's just do a quick volume review. We've been hearing FedEx say that volume is at 2019 levels. 2019 volume was, call it high 13.9 million or so, around 14 million. And then we saw last week that volumes are essentially flat with 2019. But so what is the forecast in 2020, fiscal year 2024 for FedEx Ground? The volume is expected to increase 1% over fiscal year 2023. You hear a lot, and I've said this before, folks say, oh, it's always slow in February. It always comes back. And what I'm trying to help everyone understand is the answer to the question, come back to what? Okay, so our experience over the past few years is not going to be our experience going forward. So the forecast volume increase for fiscal year 2024, which we're in right now, that ends on May 31st is 1%. And if you look at the numbers that Matt gave us last week, I don't think we're going to get a 1% increase. I think we're going to get a 1% decrease. So just call it flat year over year. And for all those out there who are suffering on the unassigned rotation, or their team runs are setting, waiting to get back, or their solos are getting canceled 2 out of every 5 days, the network is overpowered and volume is low. The thing that you need to understand and adjust to is that's not going to change. So fiscal year 2024 that we're in right now, that is 25% below 21 volume. Okay, we can all feel that. I mean, we might not know the number off the top of our head, but we know that's where it is. All right, so what's the forward looking? One of the things we're trying to do in this webinar series is help you understand the numbers and adjust your business accordingly. Let's see here. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Share your page,
So
Tim?
I'm sorry.
Can you share the graph?
I'm going to. I don't think I don't have all this on one graph. So I just want to talk about it a little bit, and then I'll show you what I have, because I'm just using one of Matt's charts from last week, but I did some more work with Matt to get some additional color. So in fiscal 2025, there's going to be, so that starts on June 1st, 2024. It's a crazy fiscal year. We talked about that. So next year is 2% over this year. Okay, well, this year was forecasted to be 1% over 2023, and it's probably not going to get there. So then 2025 is going to be pretty much the same as 2024. So what does that mean for line haul? That means over the next 14 or 15 months, flat volume. And that volume is going to be 23 to 24% below what it was in 2021. And so you need to accommodate that in your planning. So let's look at 2026. What are we thinking? Well, 2026 is planned to be 3%. These are numbers that are reported to the street. It's not Tim making anything up. The forecasted ground volume is a 3% increase from FY 2025 to FY 2026. So then if we look out 28 months from today, volume is supposed to be 3% more than next year, which is going to be flat with 2024. So before we get any marginal volume growth based on what FedEx is telling the street, it's going to be towards the end of the FY, coming out of peak in 2026. You might start to see a little tick up in volume, and that will still be substantially below, somewhere around 15 to 20% below the 2021 volume. So Alex and I have had many conversations with FedEx folks, and our opinion and their opinion is it's going to be 2027, 2028 before we get back to even with 2021. And so for those of you who are trying to figure out how to strategically plan your business, that's the facts. So don't listen to everything that might be said on Facebook. Look at what FedEx is telling the street and plan your business like that. So I'm going to share a chart here in a second, but Alex, any comments on that?
Yeah, so I'm not as doom and gloom as you are, because I kind of look at the world a different way. I exclude, and Tim and I have this conversation all the time. So I ignore 2021 and 2022s because that's the pandemic. And so we saw this massive spike in pandemic growth. And realistically, what that was is FedEx overbuilt during the pandemic and tried to pull forward all this future growth that they experienced. Now, where I look at the world is I look at 2019 volumes, 2020 volumes, and then I skip 21 and 22, and then look at 23 and 24. And what you've seen from 19 to 20 to 23, 24, and what they're projecting with 25 and 26 is a steady, if not spectacular growth. And so like my business and how I position my business is, I took advantage and expanded during the pandemic, but I didn't base my business off of that. So the volumes that I did in 2020, my volumes now are incrementally higher. They're about 10% higher than where I was in 2020, but I'm not, but my business didn't, might have grown and expanded 25% during the pandemic, but I was never planning for that long term. And so like I've been able to ride this wave, and I'm positioned myself accordingly to look for growth in that kind of marginal 2 to 3%, depending on what markets I'm in, for the next couple of years.
I think that's a good approach, and that requires some good strategic planning. And my conversation is not to be doom and gloom. My conversation is to try to help folks understand where we are, why we're here, and what it looks like going forward, and how are you going to adjust to that. Because as FedEx transforms themselves, what you did to be successful in 2020 or 2022 or 2024 is not going to be sufficient. You can see that one of the things that Alex pointed out, and when we've had our prep calls, is that, revenue per package is up 16% on lower volume. Okay. And so that's one indicator. That's just one number that you could use to understand that FedEx is working to improve their business, and those improvements that they're making are working, but that's not necessarily a net gain for their contractors, their suppliers. And so what I'm focused on is less about how FedEx is doing from their financials and more about how their efforts to improve their financials are impacting contractors. And the other thing and Alex's conversation there is extremely important to understand. This business at FedEx, even though there's hundreds and hundreds of FedEx facilities, it's extremely local in its characteristics. So Alex is in some locations. He's in Noki, Memphis, Olive Branch. Those locations are relatively strong comparatively to what you might see other places. For instance, as I reported to you 3 weeks ago, there was a week at the end of February where Rialto only sent out 20% of their assigned runs and none of their unassigned rotation. Okay, so that's a different experience in Southern California than that is being experienced in the Mid-South, and that's going to always be the case. This is why you need to understand what's going on at FedEx, what the numbers look like, and how it might affect you in your particular business. But these are the real numbers that we've been talking about, and it might be a little bit up. And as Alex said, his volume where he's running is a little bit up compared to where he was in 2020. But FedEx Ground as a whole is flat with 2019. And they're forecasting to be up 2%, which will essentially be flat in fiscal year 2025. So again, you have to account for that in your own internal calculus. So then
I think the thing we need to, and this is one thing that we're not going to really understand until we see more of the information come out. And this is one of the reasons why I really highly encourage every contractor to pay attention to the Q2s or to the 10Ks and 10Qs, because what we're going to see right now is that they're saying that volumes are flat. Okay, so what we're actually seeing is that FedEx Ground volumes are like this, and FedEx Express volumes are like this. Okay, so on the margins, what we're seeing is probably volumes that look, just slightly upward trending. And that's part of this integration that's going to occur. And we're going to see a consistent decrease in, I don't know for sure, based off of what Matt said last week and what, it sounds like to me. I'm not a FedEx employee, so I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that FedEx Express volumes are going to continue to decrease because that's where it's the least profitable segment is on a per package basis. It's really expensive to try to fly packages around the world or around the United States. So they want to mothball as many planes as possible so they get as efficient as possible so they can drive an increase in revenue per package and increase their margins there. And so I think that you're going to see probably, overall between FedEx and Ground and FedEx Express, like Tim says, it's going to be maybe 1 or 2% increase or maybe flat. But you might see your experience within FedEx Ground might be 3 or 4%, or it might be 0%. I can guarantee you the FedEx Express is going to be negative, especially when the USPS contract goes away. That's going to be a lot of volume that was running through the Express network that's no longer going to be there. And that's going to be in September. So when FedEx reports their first quarter, I guess it'll be their second quarter 2025 fiscal results in December or October or November, you're going to see them reporting that there's been a significant decrease in volume. If at that point they break out express, I think that they won't break out express volumes at that point anymore. They'll have it all rolled up under this new FedEx One initiative.
Well, it's a new leadership structure, and ground and express are under the same leadership structure. The forecast is for express to lose 5 to 6% of current volume whenever the USPS contract drops off. And so we talked about that at length last week. I think it really has pretty much no effect on ground as far as line haul goes. And Smart Post is still out there. And we all shut down the Smart Post facility some time back and integrated that volume into the existing network. Smart Post is another word for FedEx Ground economy. And so that's already a moot point. And so obviously the opportunities there are, were there going to be any line haul runs associated with the express business from the USPS? And the answer was likely no. So we don't think there'd be any impact I wanted to make a comment on our first poll question. I don't know if I worded it wrong, but the question was, do you think you can keep doing what you're doing and be successful in the future FedEx as it goes forward? And I'm trying to train myself not to call it FedEx Ground, because FedEx is starting to not call itself FedEx Ground. And 90% of you said you can keep doing what you're doing now and be successful in the future. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to challenge that thought. I don't think that that's going to be true. And so you might want to think about that. The next question here is related to freight, and we've had this conversation, and we'll just quickly go through a couple of these because there's some on the contract that I definitely are going to be very valuable. Look, there's been a lot of misinformation out there from other contractors and talking heads and people like that talking about FedEx Freight. And we heard last week, and let me reemphasize, FedEx Freight is not a part of the FedEx transformation. FedEx Freight is not coming to take your spots. They're not coming to take your line haul runs. If you look at the organization structure that they've put in place, the FedEx Ground and the FedEx Express and the corporate FedEx infrastructure, the corporate executives have been merged. But FedEx Freight is still an independent operating unit. It will continue to be that. There is always some participation in the ground and express line haul business from freight, because for a whole bunch of different reasons. But in aggregate, freight is not a part of the transformation. They will not come for your spots. They're not coming for your line haul runs. And you heard Matt think that it's a potential that FedEx may be organizing themselves in a way to spin off the freight business some way or another in the future. He's not predicting that, but he's just making that observation. And the reason he mentioned that is because of the situation in the LTL marketplace and the barriers to entry to get into that. So an existing LTL, an incumbent in that space, has a high market value. The estimate on the FedEx Freight business on the open market is $25 billion if they were to sell it. So they haven't mentioned they're going to. I'm not a stock forecaster. We're just having a conversation here. But I'm trying to put to bed this consistent rumor that's always out there on Facebook and everywhere else about freight. You don't have anything to worry about freight.
No, I mean, just to reiterate that, I mean, more importantly, to understand, even if FedEx wanted to integrate FedEx Freight into the ground and /express into what the existing infrastructure it is right now, it is a massive undertaking. Okay, so you can integrate express into ground because the chutes, like when you walk into a facility, the chutes and the belts all work the same. Okay, the problem with moving freight over is that freight, you need to have a cross-dock ability. Okay, so you need to be able to take a cube that is 36 cubic feet, so a 6x6x6 cube, and be able to move that from one side of the dock to another side of the dock. If you've been in your FedEx Freight facilities, there's very few of us that have a facility where they can do that. Now, they've built some of these cross-docking capabilities in some of the smaller RSFs and smaller stations. I think that's, that could be maybe them practicing and seeing if they could integrate everything into one world. But at the end of the day, right now, the trailers that FedEx Ground pulls and that FedEx Express pull are not set up to handle FedEx Freight type pack volumes. And the facilities that we operate in right now are not set up. So this would be a much greater and larger undertaking if they wanted to integrate the two. And I just don't see it happening, at least right now. Could there be cost savings? Yeah. I mean, the land that FedEx happens to own or lease is worth a lot of money. So those FedEx Freight facilities, could they achieve some kind of synergies by moving FedEx Freight into other facilities? Yeah. I mean, you'd have to do a really in-depth cost benefit analysis to understand, like, how much could I sell this land and this infrastructure that I have in place that FedEx Freight is currently operating in versus how much would it cost to build these facilities and capabilities at the larger FedEx Ground and FedEx Express facilities. So that's something to think about over the long term. I just don't see it happening anytime soon. So in the meantime, right now, FedEx Freight is going to be it's going to be a standalone entity that operates with its own DOT number, and it's going to be a organization that is next to us but is not involved with us.
Yep. Consistent message that you've been getting throughout this conversation is that don't worry about freight. So you can not pay attention to those freight conversations on Facebook. Okay, so we had a question related to the FedEx Ground marketplace. We answered this question in the first session, but I wanted to bring it back up. It was a question related to, given what's going on in FedEx Ground, should I sell my business or should I just hunker down and wait for it to get better? And it's really difficult. Every single business situation is different. Okay, so what I have encouraged you to do is assess your business, understand the risk that you have. Some of that risks are not FedEx related. Some of that risk is related to how you borrowed money, how you finance trucks, where are you, what runs do you have, et cetera. So some of the risk assessments that we talked about in the first session, just to quickly repeat those, if you're running a lot of empty miles, FedEx has said they're going to decrease empty miles. Take a look at that. If you're even on your assigned runs, understand what position you are in that lane. If you are number one in a lane and there's a bunch of trucks there, you're probably okay. If you're number 8 in a lane, you need to be cautious. If you're like I was and you're the only guy in a lane, you need to be cautious. FedEx canceled that run when they went through their network reconfiguration. You heard Matt say last week, and you've heard me say as well, FedEx is looking at every run. And in some cases, they're adjusting the mileage on those runs. In some cases, they're adjusting the run in its routing. In some cases, they're deleting the run in its entirety. And so now you have a risk factor. Remember what I called it? The FedEx constant is gone. And so you have to take that into consideration, assess your business. And we're going to spend the next 8 weeks talking about how to think like a Fortune 500 executive. And part of that is going to be decision-making and strategy development. And so then you can maybe use some of that information to help you decide how to go forward. If you are in the market for purchasing businesses, then you need to take the risk assessment techniques that I just mentioned and apply them to the valuation model that you're using. So these things are still true, but they're more true now because FedEx the constant is changing. And we've talked about that in detail. Alex, how would you answer that question?
So I'm a big believer in Warren Buffett. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of him. And one of the things that he's always talked about is that when people are running for the exits, when the sky is falling, that is the perfect time for you to be buying. So you've seen it over and over again. Warren Buffett, when Hurricane Sandy hit and wiped out insurers, he came in and wrote insurance policies. When Hurricane Andrews came into Florida and wiped out Florida, he came in and wiped out all these insurers. Then he came in and wrote insurance policies when no one would be willing to write insurance policies. In 2008, in the depths of the financial crisis, when no one wanted to buy stocks, he came in and bought stocks and he made a killing on it. So what I've always tried to do in my business model is that look for the opportunities when everybody says the sky is falling, when everybody's running for the exits, that's when I want to step forward and try to buy. So I have not touched my business and tried to grow my business in the last couple of years. Prior to the pandemic, I was happy with my business. During the pandemic, I ran some more runs, but I didn't add anything to my fleet, didn't increase the size of my fleet at all. I just, ran my business even stronger than it was. But now, as people are looking to exit this business, I'm trying to acquire. So I'm trying to grow right now because I think right now, when everybody's looking to head for the exits, is a good time for me to be getting in and trying to expand my business. So I'm looking to grow in my current markets. Am I trying to grow into another market that I'm not familiar with? No, but I'm very comfortable with the 3 markets that I happen to operate in. I understand what drives things in Noki. I happen to understand what drives things in Memphis, and I happen to understand what drives things in Olive Branch, and I'm trying to grow into those markets and become a bigger contractor there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a smart thing to do. You need to, and I'm sure Alex is doing this, applying those risk factors that I just talked about in the valuation of those businesses. So I've been saying that there's going to be businesses for sale, and they're going to be priced at a lower price than they have been over the past 3 to 4 years. And you still need to be choosy about how you grow by acquisition. I do believe that's going to be the only way you grow. There's going to be the occasional run that gets posted, but in aggregate, the total number of trucks in the network is going to shrink. And
I think the total. I agree with the total number of trucks that are going to be in the network are going to decrease as FedEx gets rid of their spare capacity. Okay, so FedEx has mismanaged the fleet for years, or maybe not necessarily mismanaged their fleet. They've been using spare capacity for a long time, and they're getting away from using that spare capacity. Why? I don't know, but they want to move away from having a lot of spares running miles that should be either getting allocated to dedicated runs or getting allocated to the UR rotation. So I think we're going to see a decrease in the number of tractors in the fleet, but those are spares. I don't necessarily agree, and I don't think we're going to see a decrease in the number of assigned runs out there or assigned tractors in the network. I do think that FedEx is working to try to increase the utilization of the tractors that they have in their fleet as they get rid of these spares. And so anecdotally, over the last 2 months, I've seen like my night rotation tractors being utilized heavily on the unassigned run rotation, to the point where I've been asked, and I am asking, can I move my AM unassigned run rotation tractors to the PM rotation because they are being utilized so much more heavily than my AM tractors? So that's one of the things that you have to be doing. And to Tim's point, you have to be constantly evaluating your business and talking to your senior line haul managers and your planners and understanding where is the volume and where is the utilization going. So right now in my home markets, the night rotation is being heavily utilized. So I am trying to figure out how to move and make more of my, you provide additional power to FedEx and during those time periods to increase my utilization.
Yeah, that's the right thing to do. I don't know exactly what the number of assigned runs that are going to be canceled are, but I hear it all the time. It happened to my business. I think there'll be some changes, whether it's a net loss in the number of assigned runs across the network. I can't say, but an assigned run has more risk to it than it's ever had. That doesn't mean if you're number one in a lane of 10 that you have anything to worry about, because you don't. But Alex has a lane going to Chicago to Noki that used to run 5 trucks and now it's running 3, right? And so until volume changes, that's going to be the case. And if you were numbers 4 and 5 in that lane, you're gonna struggle a little bit. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to decide if you're going to stay in the business or get out. you need to assess the risk based on those factors that we talked about. The next question we want to talk about then is related to what will FedEx do with these empty stations? And I had a long conversation about this with Matt. And look, there's everybody. It's easy for somebody who is not at a company to tell them what they should do. And the concept that you would all of a sudden begin using existing or former FedEx facilities as warehousing for existing customers, or to potentially start providing a similar type business as Amazon that's really just pie in the sky stuff. Okay. Amazon is extremely good at what they're doing. They're mainly a technology company. And I don't see any time, and nor has FedEx mentioned it, that they're about to try to get in a position to challenge Amazon. And that's kind of what warehousing for customers would turn into be. That's I used to work for one of the board members at FedEx. His name is Jim Barksdale. You can look him up, and he said many times to me, Tim, the main thing in business is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I believe that culture still exists at FedEx. I don't anticipate them trying to get into another business right now. I think they're focused on trying to get to be really good at what they're already doing and very cost efficient. You can see their profits are increasing. Again, remember, FedEx performance is different than what's going on in the line haul network. We talked about this last week. They're going to take a net $450 million out of the line haul business. And by doing that, that's going to impact contractors, but it's going to have a positive impact on FedEx earnings. So you might see them sell those properties, and that would add some value. They mostly own stuff. They mostly lease stuff anyway. So I don't think that's a big deal. But we also had a question on UPS, and I have some answers. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to read these answers from Matt as it pertains to UPS. So the question was related to, hey, what's going on at UPS? Are they cutting costs? Are they winning share, losing share? Did the wage increase last year impact them? What's the future projections? Okay, so a series of questions there around UPS. So I'm gonna give you the answer on that I got from Matt. Essentially, Matt's comment is that the strike hurt them last year and they lost some market share. Now remember, FedEx revenue and UPS revenue is almost exactly the same. However, UPS enterprise value is substantially higher than FedEx enterprise value. In other words, the capital value on the street, because UPS is historically more efficient than FedEx, which is why they're going through this process. But the consensus is that they're going to probably win back whatever share they lost in the second half of calendar 2024. Alex has some information related to a couple customers that have made the transition to UPS. So as far as cost cutting goes, UPS is going to cut $1.3 billion in headcount and optimize their network to the tune of $1.5 billion. So that's $2.8 billion cost reduction through calendar year 2026. So over the next 18 months. And so they are also focused on reducing their cost, and they have to, because FedEx is going to reduce theirs and become more competitive. So UPS has to do that. Anytime they impact headcount, there's some incredibly stringent union rules, and they'll have to pay guys for some extended period of time. All those are included in the cost reduction. They expect a $4.4 billion operating income growth by their fiscal year 2026, which matches the calendar. And of course, we just talked about, of that 4.4, 2.8 is going to come from optimization and cost reduction. So what they're expecting is a $1.6 billion increase by then in dollars from operations, so higher revenues. So hopefully that helps you understand that UPS is going through some similar challenges, but in aggregate, FedEx and UPS are typically about the same in terms of revenue. and they swap customers back and forth all the time. Any of those of us who've ever run spots have seen that happen. And, so FedEx is focused less on what UPS is doing and more on what they need to do to optimize their own business. Alex, any comments on the UPS?
Oh, I mean, I think what you're going to see is the same thing that FedEx has to deal with. You have 3 trailers in Memphis that are going to Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? So you want to maximize the amount of volume that goes into those 3 trailers so that you can try to send them out as close to being 100% full as possible. Now, what you don't want to be is in a situation where you have 2 1/4 trailers or 3 1/4 trailers. In that situation, then you're in a conundrum where you have this 3/4 of a trailer that is empty, and then you're trying to figure out how to fill it so you can get it off. And so, a lot of times in that scenario, UPS and FedEx at that point in time will pick up some less profitable shippers, some less profitable customers to try to fill those trailers so that they can be, so they can get those other quarter packages going along. And so you see that often enough. That's what, I think that's part of the thought process behind FedEx deciding not to go aggressively after the USPS business. It was low profit business. And so this allowed them, whereas before it used to fill up an airplane for them or fill up multiple airplanes, they've recognized that, we can actually generate relatively similar revenue, but have a higher profit margin by sitting planes and running less planes and just having them more full. So I think you're going to see the same thing in our network, where FedEx is going to look at their vendor or their customer list and say, okay, we want to maximize the revenue per trailer. We want to maximize the revenue per package. And so they're willing to forego some of those, the low-hanging fruit, the less profitable packages in their business model going forward. So I think that's what you're seeing right now. And UPS, on the other hand, is, because of the union contract and everything like that, they need to have greater volume and greater throughput going through their contract. Whether or not it's less profitable is not as important as making sure that they are eking out some profit to cover the cost of this new contract that's going through. So I would say until UPS has talked about this in their last quarterly call, they're going to be doing a very significant technological integration over the next couple of years to try to generate additional cost savings by doing a heavy investment in technology. So I think what you're going to see with UPS is they might suffer from margin compression in the near term as they try to identify where they can cut headcount and use technology to replace that headcount, either in white collar or package handlers or package sortation. So I think you're going to see some stuff going on in there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's a theme there that Alex mentioned. UPS is a world-class company in terms of technology. They've always been superior in their technology. FedEx has not. On the express side, they've been pretty good, but not on the ground or freight side. FedEx is going to invest heavily in technology. There's a lesson in technology, the emphasis on technology. There's a lesson in that for line haul contractors. So Alex, I sent you a question in the chat there about negotiations on contracts. What do you think about that?
So why are P&D contracts not negotiated? Why are P&D contracts negotiated in line haul or not? Hey Sonny, thanks for the question. I've always asked this question. I've never gotten a very good answer. What I've always been told is that there are so many different variables to the P&D contracts. And so that, there's so many different inputs that have to go in. So there is a negotiation process with the individual P&D contractor and PGH to determine what makes the most sense. On the line haul side, it's less. They want to try to keep it uniform. Historically, you've seen just generic across the board increases going on. What you've seen recently is that, FedEx will try to bounce off ideas off of a couple contractors. I've never been one of those, but I think that there are contractors out there who get to have a little bit of input, or PGH might bounce ideas off of. Maybe not, I don't know. But what you've seen right now is that FedEx tries to respond to the dynamics of what they're seeing in their communication with contractors. So the last couple of years, FedEx has tried to increase the short miles. the revenue per mile for contractors who run a lot of short runs, because historically they've had a lot of contractors say they're not profitable and have refused to do those runs. So that's why you saw the Schedule J initiative and stuff like that. So they are responsive to what they hear from us. But at the end of the day, their view is that they have a uniform contract that they're going to give to all contractors. And then it's pretty much a take it or leave it kind of a contract.
Yeah, I was very disappointed when they canceled the Schedule J. I was one of the guys that was running Schedule J, and in Memphis was doing it the correct way. Other senior managers across the country were not. Essentially, what Schedule J gave senior managers the ability to do was on runs that were not profitable and they couldn't get contractors to do them, they could give you a weekly, call it a stipend, if you will, to make that run profitable, and that way they could get it done. So unfortunately, that's gone. I think that the line haul business lends itself to an easier way to normalize, essentially like the general trucking industry does, the costs and associated revenue for those types of businesses is kind of normalized across the country, and they have essentially a unified measure in the spot rate that they can kind of gauge themselves against on what their cost to operate is. And I'm talking about FedEx here. So there's no real reason in FedEx view to worry about negotiating contracts or negotiating those types of things in revenue with line haul contractors, because they already have something to compare against. And then, of course, they have, as Alex pointed out, they have made some adjustments in how they pay us. And now you get some geographic diversity based on maybe increased costs in certain geographies. Alex and I have had long conversations with FedEx folks about how they do their math, because we don't necessarily agree with where they get their numbers and how they approach those numbers, but at least they are trying to be accommodating along that way. And then, of course, the fuel surcharge varies around the country.
I would say my impression from being in Orlando is that FedEx there is a lag to their numbers that they utilize to come up with the new contracts every August. And so I would say it feels like when they're incorporating truck prices and looking at truck prices, there's about probably a 12-month lag. And so that is one thing I noticed. They are much more responsive to other things, to the cost of drivers. It seems like they're much more responsive, but to the cost of trucks, it seems to be a little bit sticky there. Otherwise, recruiting costs, they look at those as being transient. Right now, my recruiting costs are very low. There has been times when recruiting costs have been very high for me. And so I think I agree with them that, recruiting costs ebb and flow, and it's a very transient number. I think the things that they concern themselves with are looking at what is the cost, what is driver wages are, and what are the driver wages in the different markets. And so that's where I think you see the differences in VMR. What is the cost to the general businesses, which the incorporation, the accounting, all those things, which are kind of part of the mileage plus, and then what are the truck costs? And so I think the one area that they need to do a better job in capturing is how dynamic and how quickly truck costs have changed. Because right now we're in a very weird market where you have really high new truck costs, but the used truck market is kind of soft. Right now you can get 2016 to 2019 tractors for not a lot of money. Now, 2019 to 2022 tractors are really expensive. So there is a significant bifurcation in the used truck market. And a lot of that has to do with the tech, not the safety tech that's involved in the trucks. But
the used truck market's going to get even softer because, Pride Trucking in Canada is just going to put 4,500 trucks on the market. So, that's going to soften the market even more. I think Alex is exactly right on that. Alex, I got you a question there in the chat if you want to take a look at the next one here related to ELDs.
You want me to answer the ELD question, or you want me to answer about the metals?
Answer ELDs, and then we'll get to metals.
Okay, so the question on ELD is when the ELD goes down and drivers have to use paper logs, who do you submit them to and how does it get updated in Omnitrax? Okay, so there is the ability for you to go back in and try to update Omnitrax technologically wise to convert a paper log into Omnitrax. It's really hard to do. I don't recommend it. You have to have somebody who's really, really knowledgeable and very comfortable with how to edit your Omnitrax logs, and I don't find it very user friendly. So what I typically do is take that paper log, I'll PDF it into a black and white document, and then I will send it by email to this third-party vendor that FedEx uses to convert convert that data into the metrics that they need to utilize for their reporting requirements to the FMCSA and to the DOT. It used to be Lytics that they did it. Now it's Trimble or / PeopleSoft. It's a website. So you have to go, you cannot ask a station for this. You have to go to your line haul. You got to go to your hub to find out the information. So if you happen to be working out of Covington, so you wouldn't ask the Covington station. They probably don't know it. You would want to go ask Olive Branch for the email address. I don't have the actual email address off the top of my head. It's a weird email address. But ask the hub and they'll be able to provide that information to you. Now, when you're driving down the road and you have this paper log in your Omnitrax, you need to make sure that you keep that paper log for the 8 days so you can provide it to the DOT officer if you happen to get pulled over. So once those 8 days are passed, you can get rid of the paper log. But during that 8-day time frame where you've had to have a paper log and didn't have them in Omnitrax, you need to maintain it so you can show it to the DOT officer if you get pulled over for an inspection.
Yeah, that is a really detailed response, exactly what we needed. This is an example of where when you come into the business as a line haul contractor, on day one, you're expected to know everything Alex just told you. And there is no book on how to be a line haul contractor, right? And so you need help when you get started in this business. I help a lot of folks. Alex helps a lot of folks. These are really, really important things that you need to understand how to do. And FedEx expects you to know. When I said in the first session, you have a contract with a Fortune 50 company, and they are expecting you to behave as a Fortune 50 company, even though they're expecting you to know tons of things that they never tell you. Okay. So you need a mentor in this business. If you don't have one, you need to find one. So Alex, go ahead and take that question. Then read the question and let them know about the metals and safety tiers.
Okay, how our safety tiers and new metals will play a role in FedEx decisions with regards to small contractors versus large. I feel that one will get squeezed and large may survive, or it could be the other way around. Any predictions? So I would say FedEx has a desire. I don't know this for sure. I get the impression that FedEx has a desire to grow for a little bit of consolidation within their contractor base. The reason why I think this is because they want contractors who are able to have dedicated people handling safety and technology, because FedEx is requiring us to provide more and more information and more handling of this. It makes it a safer network for them. It allows them to offload some of the roles and responsibilities and the administration that they have to do for the DOT number and for the FMCSA onto contractors. And the only way you do that is by having larger contractors who can handle that admin backup. So I do agree with the question that I think FedEx would like to have larger contractors up to a point. They do not want to be beholden or held hostage by large contractors. So they will never allow a large contractor to grow to such a point where it can potentially harm their business either in a station or a hub, not a station, but more in a hub area. So I think they will limit contractors to a certain degree. What that number is, I don't know. Historically, it had always been, you can't be more than 15 tractors in a hub area. Well, I can tell you that that's not true anymore. There are plenty of contractors who are much larger than 15 tractors in a hub area. What that upper range is, I don't know. Now, tiers, like how does safety tiers work and how does the metals work? So metals is a function of three things. it's your safety, it's your availability, and it's your service. Okay, those are the three functions that go into your metals, into your metal score. In my mind, safety should be 90% of that number. It's not. It's a less than what you would typically expect, but it's still a significant portion. I believe, according to the frequently asked questions that is on mygroundbiz and MGB, safety accounts for about 45% of your metal score, with availability accounting for 35%, and then service accounting for 15%, or maybe it's 10%. Maybe my numbers are off there somewhere. So if you are bronze, the guidance we've been given is that you will not be allowed to bid or grow within the network until you become bronze trending silver, or maybe it might actually be you have to be silver. Now, if you are silver, you're allowed to grow. And if you're gold, you're allowed to grow. Now, how do you move from silver to gold? And how do you move from, and what happens for gold contractors to move to silver? It's not very clear, and FedEx is still working through this to give you information. I can tell you for myself right now, I am silver trending silver, and I am probably going to be, what is today? Today is the 9th. I will probably be a tier 4 safety for the, next, come April 15th. My service is 99 point, whatever percent. And my availability, I think my average fleet name availability is somewhere around 98%. So do I know how to get from silver to gold? No, I don't. Do I know what is the cutoff from between silver and gold? I do not. And that is information that I am trying to gather myself from FedEx on a regular basis. When I have conversations with my senior line haul managers, they are still working through the process to be able to communicate to me in an effective manner of what I need to do to move myself from silver to gold. Sorry for a long-winded answer, but in general,
no, that was
yeah,
that was very helpful. I mean, because Alex knows that. He knows that as well as anybody. We both had long conversations with the guys in Orlando about the metals for line haul, and they didn't have any answers. So I think this metals thing is going to continue to evolve. I wish FedEx would get to the point technologically where you would be able to go to your MyBiz account and see what your metal score is on a running count. They need to get the safety score there first. They still are not providing that information on a regular basis so that you know what's going on without going in and sitting down and them printing out an ugly document for you to look at your safety score. So hopefully their technology that they're working on is going to help evolve that. One of the things that Alex said is absolutely true. As I've talked in the past, running Fortune 500 divisions in the past, one of the things I had to have was a supplier management program. And I had supplier management programs that divided suppliers into tier 1, 2, and 3. And those tiers were based on performance. And in this case, what FedEx has done is adopted the same thing. So tier 1 is gold, tier 2 is silver, tier 3 is bronze. And there were key performance metrics in each of those categories. And FedEx is essentially moving towards this philosophy. And their existing philosophy or historical philosophy around contractors has been, and they've said it a million times, they don't, and Alex mentioned it, they don't want contractors to have too much, they call it putting too many eggs in one basket. The problem with that is you end up in a situation like they have now where you'll go into a hub and they'll have 35 or 40 carriers, contractors in one hub area. I remember talking to the guys in Memphis. They had 35 contractors in Memphis. And then that just becomes a different kind of supplier management problem. You can't effectively administrate that many contractors in one location and stay on top of everything. And if you're a 3-truck company, you simply don't have the ability to have the scale that Alex mentioned as you would if you're Alex and you got 20 trucks in Memphis, right? So they know that in order to lower their cost and make themselves more efficient, remember, the cost efficient focus is on the entire company, not just on certain elements of it. And one of the things they have to do is get better at administering these contracts so they can get better at demanding performance from contractors and doing that at a lower internal cost. And one of the ways they do that is by essentially what's going to happen over the course of time. There's going to be fewer contractors, and those contractors are going to be bigger. Now, I'm not saying that's happening by next year. I'm saying if you look at this network 5 years out, 8 years out, that and compare it to where it was in 2024 or 2023, there will be fewer contractors, and those contractors will have a larger scale. That's better for contractors in many respects, but it is way better for FedEx in order for them to get the results from contractors like Alex described.
I think one of the things, and this goes to a point that Tim always talks about, what you're going to see, or what I expect, is that FedEx realizes larger contractors will do more things that are automated or with technology. And so they will be able to achieve cost savings internally and reduce headcount in their hubs and in their stations with larger contractors, because they will use electronic systems or technology to report their IVMRs. They will use technology or electronic systems to report their MMRs. Right now, what happens is that we, depending on who the contractor is, it might be handed in handwritten. The IVMR might be a handwritten sheet of paper that gets handed to FedEx, and then FedEx has to transcribe that into a new system. When I send my IVMRs, I send them to them as a PDF. Do you know what they do with them right now? They print them out and they transcribe them into another system. MMRs, they have some contractors who just turn in receipts to them, and they are expected, FedEx will then transcribe those receipts into an MMR and then submit it to the DOT or the FMCSA. What I do with mine is I type them into a PDF that I then email off to FedEx. You know what they do with them there? They print them off and they retype them into another system. So if they get larger contractors who use technology, they have the ability to maybe eventually get to a point where they have a website that we would upload documents to, that information then gets sent off to PGH for IVMRs or to the FMCSA for MMRs, and they can reduce, one or two bodies per station that's making something around $60,000 a year. Those people are making, so that's a significant cost savings for FedEx if they can achieve this. And so that's one of the reasons why they want to move to a point where they have larger contractors. Do they want to have a bunch of 100-truck contractors? No. I think their sweet spot is probably, I don't know, Tim, what do you think, like 15 trucks?
They would love to have I think they'd like to, this is my opinion without having any data, but knowing the difference between I was 15 and I was 30, then I was 60. At 30, you have enough cash flow if you're managing your business efficiently to be able to staff, functions in your company that you can't do at 5 or 15. So I would think they might want to get contractors to 30. That would be what I would think. But again, they haven't told me that. I do know they have some technology needs. I've discussed it with them. We'll see where they go. Again, dealing with FedEx on the vendor side is like pushing a noodle up a mountain, because it's like dealing with the Pentagon. So, and
it's really not the number of trucks. I want to, and I apologize for saying this and then dragging Tim into this. It's a question of more of the amount of revenue that you're generating. Yeah. So they want, there's a lot of different ways to get to say $3 or $4 million in revenue a year, but that's where they want a lot of contractors who generate $3 to $4 million in revenue a year. Because at that point, like Tim said, if you're somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 25% revenue, 15 to 25% margins at say $4 million in revenue, then you're generating, then you're having $800,000 that you can spread out across a bunch of different admin functions and yourself, right? You can have you have a BC who's managing your dispatch. You might have somebody who's doing recruiting and HR and finance for you, and you might have, and then you're working on the business. So that's where they want to get, I think, contractors too. And I would say that recognizes that line haul guys, need to have margins somewhere between 15 and 25%. I don't know this for sure. I've never talked to FedEx about it, but I think they recognize that that's where the sweet spot for margin is for contractors to be able to continue reinvesting in their fleet and adopting new technology.
And that number's been under severe pressure over the past couple of years. So you have to, and we're going to have long conversations about this over the next 8 weeks. Alex, I got one more question in there for you in the chat related to butt heads. I know you do a lot of these.
Yes.
It doesn't get really talked about in the contract much. So let Alex explain the details on this.
Okay, so the question is there an actual way to find out your exact meet time for a butt head? The drivers on the other side are constantly showing up late, but our terminal keeps telling us they can't control the other terminal's dispatch. We started leaving later because my driver would sit for 1 or 2 hours, but now FedEx is requiring us to leave on time or else they are threatening to give the runaway. Also, is there a max time we are required to wait after the scheduled meet time passes before we can contractually do something? Okay, so one, FedEx is not, this is the gray area of the contract. FedEx realistically cannot tell you when you dispatch, okay? Because you are not an employee of FedEx. They can tell you when the meet time is and that you have a requirement to arrive at the meet time. The meet time is not in your contract. As much as I would love for it to be listed on your A1, it is not. It's actually in something called TMS. So you can ask dispatch to provide you with the meet times for all your assigned runs as according to TMS. Okay. This is the agreed upon time between the two terminals when the bump will occur or when the butt head will occur. And FedEx tries to keep the tries to require contractors to be there within a half an hour of each other. Now, does that always happen? No, but that is how you find out when the bump times are. Like I go regularly, I have discussions with Noki, Memphis, and Olive Branch about what time my bumps are, because those are in TMS, and then backwards plan on when I need to get my tractors out. Now, FedEx does the same thing and has cut times for their tractors. And I have those conversations with FedEx all the time. If they're not cutting my tractors in time for me to be able to arrive at my bumps on time. When the other side is late, there are a number of different things you can do. If you really want to push it, I had an issue with another contractor at a bump. They were typically showing up late. I started going through. You always have the option to go through if you want. So it was on a run that I happened to have a sleeper truck on. I talked to my driver about it. He was very frustrated and said, okay, let's go through for the next 2 weeks. And you know what happened? All of a sudden, that contractor started showing up on time. The other thing is that you can talk to what you're being told by dispatch is not true. I would talk to the planner or talk to your senior line haul manager if necessary and have a conversation about the bumps. Because where it becomes an issue is then you need to use the appropriate language. You need to use FedEx speak to make sure that they understand. Okay, you have to say everything not in like, oh, it's causing, my drivers are getting frustrated, or I'm getting frustrated, or I'm having problems staffing my company. FedEx doesn't care. You need to use the language that FedEx cares about. This is causing me hours of service issues. Okay, I'm having to use drive time extensions. I'm having to use adverse condition extensions. I'm worried about having an hours of service failure because I'm running out of on-duty time. I'm worried about having an hours of service violation because I'm running out of drive time. I am worried about I'm having issues at the bump because the drivers are getting into arguments about the appropriate bump times, and I'm worried about the safety of my drivers. If you use the appropriate language and you put it in writing when you communicate and you CC BDS on that language and you use that language with dispatch, with the senior line haul manager, with the planner, FedEx is going to react. FedEx doesn't want to be responsible for an hours of service violation. FedEx does not want to be responsible for for a safety incident occurring at a bump. That is stuff that FedEx does not want to be involved in. So if you use the appropriate language when you're communicating with FedEx, you can achieve the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, and the other thing that on bumps, because everything Alex said is spot on, and the additional thing that you can express a concern, because this is FedEx language. I'm going to keep missing the sort. I'm going to be late for the sort getting back if you don't do something with these guys on the other end. And look, they're going to be all over that. If you had that conversation, and then that's impacting FedEx, then they will respond. And this one of the things that Alex just said, needs to be a core behavior for you as a line haul contractor. Is he said this, they don't care about your specific challenges. You need to learn to talk to them in ways that talk about what's impacting you and how it impacts them. And then you can start to move the rock. It's something that you might have learned if you had been in the corporate world for a long time that won't be obvious to you, and you'll get very frustrated that FedEx is not listening to your concerns. And let me tell you something, they never will be listening to your concerns. They got more mortal wounds and they got Band-Aids, right? And so, but if you present to them something that's impacting them, you're going to get a response.
You always want to put it in hours of service terms, safety terms, or sort terms. Like I had a situation, perfect example. Okay. FedEx ignored me. I said, okay, look, I'm going to have an hours of service violation one of these days. And so I had a situation where it kept coming into a point where I had to use an adverse conditions on one of my tractors because of, delay at the bump. And then it happened. I told FedEx about this. I said, this is what happens. And they said, okay, we're going to address it. It happened again the next day. Well, the next day I didn't have the ability to do it adverse conditions. You're only allowed to do it once a week. So, on a duty time extension. And so I ended up dropping, I instructed my driver to pull over into a rest stop and drop the load. And FedEx got upset with me because I dropped it and they wanted me to stay there and provide security. I'm like, I cannot provide security. My driver is no longer on duty. He's run out of on-duty time. It's actually illegal for me to require him to stay there. And so he PC'd on the way home, and we left 2 trailers in the middle of nowhere. FedEx was not very happy with me, but, it got to the point where I had an hours of service violation and I couldn't do anything else anymore. So there are little, things that happen. That situation wasn't all that bad. We ended up dropping, at a FedEx facility. But, that's the kind of stuff that you have to explain and make sure that FedEx understands that, there are repercussions for you not listening to my concerns when it comes to hours of service. Hours of service is a really big deal. Okay. FedEx is very sensitive. You should be very sensitive. If you have multiple hours of service violations with a DOT officer, he can put your truck out of service. He can put your drivers out of service, and he can, if you have enough incidences, he can put your company out of service. And that's the last thing you want. So you need to pay attention to your hours of service and make sure you understand the FMCSA requirements and you follow them. Okay. There's no wiggle room. You do not PC from Chicago back to Noki with a trailer. That is a no-no. You do not PC, under a load ever. That is a no-no. You can never personal convey anywhere when you're under a load. If you're under a load, you're on drive time. Okay. Even if your driver runs out of time, you stop, you pull over, you wait. If you have on-duty time, then you are required to wait and provide security to those trailers until FedEx can rescue those loads. Okay. This is very important. Do not ever violate the hours of service.
Yeah. One of the things that Alex and I have talked about before, and we're going to spend some time on this going forward. Appreciate Alex's time today. One of the things you learn in the military, so it's kind of natural for Alex and I, is scenario planning, right? And so you would, in my company, I probably had 1,000 scenarios planned in the event that they ever occurred. So we just talked about butt heads. On every butt head that I had, I knew where every FedEx station was and how far it was from each other along that route. And if I bumped into a potential hours of service issue like Alex is describing, I would prematurely say, okay, I would call, let's say, Memphis. Okay, Memphis, this guy's running late. I'm going to be dropping these trailers in Nashville. And they're going to freak out. But I'm like, hey, I'm not going to have an hours of service violation. Not only am I going to drop these trailers in Nashville, but my guy is going to do his 10-hour break in the Nashville yard, and I'm going to miss in the morning because you held me too long at the bump. And now you're putting pressure on them. You're impacting their operation, and you're doing it using the very few levers that you have. This is not really a lever. It's a federal law. So you just need to really understand what your options are and how do you make decisions on where you can drop trailers and keep them safe. And look, this happens all the time, right? There's broken teams, broken meets. They happen all the time in small stations all across the country. All of a sudden, 2 trailers show up and they're like, what the hell do I do with those, right? So what Alex is talking about is for those who know how to do it, it's a relatively common practice. And so I really appreciate Alex's time today. We're gonna cut this thing off here in a couple of minutes. As you can tell, Alex knows a lot about the line haul business. He's a top-notch contractor. And you know, we have gone back through the first 3 sessions and answered a lot of questions related to the technical details that we covered in the first 3 weeks. Now, what's going to happen going forward, starting next week, again at 2 o'clock, then as we talked about where we are in the network and why and where it's going to go and what you're contractually committed to, now we're going to talk about, let's build some skills in order to be able to think like a Fortune 500 executive and be prepared to transform your thinking in your company so that you can keep pace with the FedEx transformation. You need to transform yourself as a supplier. If you're the same supplier 2 years from now that you were 2 years ago, you're going to really struggle. You're going to have to develop some new capabilities, some new skill sets, some new competencies in your company. So what I want to do over the next 8 weeks is kind of do a course on thinking like a Fortune 500 executive. And next week, we're going to spend the whole time talking about something that rarely gets mentioned in FedEx contractor circles. We're going to spend a lot of time on leadership and quality principles. And when we talk about leadership, it's not some leadership class. And we're specifically going to talk about how to be a leader in times of crisis, because I think we could say right now this transformation is stressing our companies and it's a little bit of a crisis. And we're going to talk about how you can lead your company during those times, how you can organize around some core principles in order to start to clarify your thinking and how it needs and what you need to look like going forward. And then we're going to use that as building blocks, and we're going to go through the next 7 weeks are going to be all about building blocks. And at the end, the last session, session 11 in this session will be about strategy, right? So you have to learn a lot of other stuff to get to the point where you have the competency available to actually develop a strategy that aligns with your business needs and your customer's environment. And that's what we're going to do. And then the last week, the week before the Line Haul Summit, we're going to do a wrap-up discussion. We may bring back Alex. We may bring back Matt, may bring in some others. And we're going to talk about what we learned and how to get ready for the Line Haul Summit and where you might want to focus your time. If you haven't yet signed up for the Line Haul Summit, as you know, Alex and I are co-founders of that. You need to go do that. There's going to be the educational sessions that we have laid out for this year are going to be absolutely top notch. And for those of you who are experienced contractors, we've listened, and we're going to have some what I call master's level courses there. So it's going to be great content for everyone. We have a bigger expo than we've ever had. It's a great time for you to learn more about how to survive during this FedEx transformation. So in fact, during the summit, I'm going to present something on a kind of another session 13, if you will, on of this webinar series. So thanks again to everyone that attended, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next week. And thanks again to Alex.
See you guys. Talk to you guys later.